How's everyone doing today? It's your boy JJ Domination, and today we are going to be projecting where all of the projected, 2020 free agent quarterbacks will go. I mean, you'll see the title, it'll be more condensed and organized, but we're going to be trying to predict where these quarterbacks are going to go. For some of these guys, it's going to be pretty easy. For others, it's going to be interesting. The goal is to really just take a shot in the dart of where all of these guys could go. Nothing more, nothing less. So, we're going to start off with Drew Brees, and I will see you once we get to Drew Brees. So, I think for Drew Brees right here, there's only really two options, and for me, it's either he's going to stick around with the New Orleans Saints or he's going to retire. I think those are honestly the only two options for Drew Brees. He's had a great career, of course, for those who know, of course, he did start out with the Chargers, the San Diego Chargers, and of course ended up being an all-time great on the New Orleans Saints. Just a very interesting career that he's had, and overcoming a lot, the whole size discrepancy and all that. But Drew Brees is seriously one of the best quarterbacks to ever play in the NFL, and he is contemplating retirement. It's something that he's definitely going to weigh and something he's definitely going to think about. But I would just like to see Drew Brees back on the football field for one more year. I'm hoping, he changes his mind about that, because I honestly think he could still go at least another year. So, it's just something to keep in mind when talking about Drew Brees. The next quarterback we are going to talk about is going to be Philip Rivers. So I'll see you there. So for Philip Rivers right here, he is going to be a quarterback that we have multiple options for, and one of those options is going to be the LA Chargers. Now, it is being rumored that the LA Chargers are planning to move on from Philip Rivers. There's probably a good chance he doesn't come back to this team next year, but just for the sake of it, because it could be smoke and mirrors, we are going to just have the Chargers be listed as a potential landing spot for Philip Rivers. I mean, obviously, he's been there his whole career. It only makes sense. But again, like I said, it's rumored that the Chargers don't want him back, aren't interested in negotiating. So, you do have to keep that in mind. But like I said, this is going to be option number one for Philip Rivers. Option number two for Philip Rivers could be the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Of course, we heard about the rumors about him, purchasing a home in Florida, moving his family out there to Florida, and it could be, real smoke and mirrors. I know Philip Rivers has definitely thought about his family more towards the end of the season and at the final interview for the season or whatever. So it is definitely something to think about. I mean, he is moving his family there. Maybe he goes to Tampa Bay. Maybe Bruce Arians has interest in working with a veteran quarterback. I mean, we saw him have success, him being Bruce Arians, with Carson Palmer. So it wouldn't surprise me if Bruce Arians wanted to work with a veteran quarterback like Philip Rivers. We saw Bruce Arians, of course, work with guys like Peyton Manning before. So it would just be very interesting, to say the least. And who knows, if Tampa Bay does decide to move on from Jameis Winston, which is very possible, then this could be a little Band-Aid while Bruce Arians drafts a quarterback in the second or third round. I've been hearing names like Jacob Eason flying around, maybe even Jake Fromm, but I think Eason's a better fit for Bruce Arians. So we'll just stick with that. But this is option number two for Philip Rivers. And then, ladies and gentlemen, right here, option three, I do have Philip Rivers potentially going to the Tennessee Titans. He's not from Tennessee, but he's from Alabama, but Alabama's close to Tennessee. Tennessee potentially may or may not franchise tag Ryan Tannehill or offer him a contract. I think they will, but if they don't, if there's a world where Ryan Tannehill does end up on the open market, I do think Philip Rivers to the Titans wouldn't be the worst idea in the world. I mean, That offensive line for Tennessee improved as the season went on. There's the potential for you to re-sign Derrick Henry, but you do have some good weapons over there. You got Corey Davis, of course. You got A.J. Brown, who arguably could have been Rookie of the Year. You have Delanie Walker coming back, but even if Delanie Walker isn't a guy you can rely on, you have Jonnu Smith, who is emerging as one of the underrated tight ends in football, and of course you got a good defense to help you out. It would be like a lateral move going from the Chargers to the Titans, even though the Chargers were so terrible this year. A lot of that is because of Phillip Rivers and his turnovers, and the fact that the offensive line just isn't good. But the Titans have, a better defense. Maybe not the star power that the Chargers have with like Derwin James, Casey Hayward, and Melvin Ingram, Joey Bosa, but they got a pretty damn good defense in Tennessee. It's something that would help take the pressure off of an aging quarterback like Phillip Rivers. But this is option 3. I'm going to keep it at 3 options per quarterback at the most. Maybe I'll throw in a wild card here or there for a couple of them, but we're going to try to keep it minimalistic. So right here at number 3, option 3, I have the Tennessee Titans for Phillip Rivers. And now we are going to move on to the next quarterback, and that is going to be Jameis Winston. So, of course, right here for Jameis Winston, option 1 would be a franchise tag or a short-term contract with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. He had a very interesting season. It was good and bad all at the same time. Of course, the memes about his 30 for 30, 30 touchdowns, 30 interceptions, but he did have 5,000 yards passing, and Jameis Winston showed a lot of good signs of, I guess being able to play at a high level, but the turnovers definitely, all of them aren't his fault. A lot of it is just him trying to force the ball down the field because A, they don't have a running game, a consistent enough running game, and B, he has to play from behind a lot, and teams that do have to play from behind tend to make more mistakes. You see, like in the playoffs, for example, Lamar Jackson turned the ball over a few times because he spent that game playing from behind. Same thing for Jameis Winston. He has spent a lot of games throughout his career playing from behind. Not saying, not trying to justify his turnovers or anything, because a lot of them are stupid just by looking at his tape or whatever, but I can't really put all of that on him. Definitely the majority of them, but not all. But Jameis staying in Tampa Bay, it wouldn't really surprise me. It gives Bruce Arians enough time to try to draft and develop his replacement, similar to what we talked about with Phillip Rivers, but this would be option 1 for Jameis. As crazy as this looks, this is option number two, and that's Jameis Winston to the LA Chargers. I know it looks crazy, but it could be as simple as a swap for Phillip Rivers in free agency. And Jameis is kind of Phillip Rivers-esque in a way. He's big. He's got a big arm. He'll throw it all over the lot, but he will make a lot of mistakes. You're getting a younger Phillip Rivers, essentially, in terms of what both guys are capable of. Jameis a better athlete, of course, because he's younger. But, this would just be interesting. I think this would definitely be an interesting one, to say the least. They'll have a better running game, potentially. I know both Melvin Gordon and Austin Eckler are free agents, but I'm pretty sure they'll bring at least one of those guys back. And you'll have a better running game than whatever you had in Tampa Bay. So that could take some of the pressure off, but, it would just definitely be interesting. Plus, you have a better defense in place, so most games you won't have to play from behind. So as long as you don't put your defense in harm's way, I think things will be better than what they were in Tampa Bay. So this is an interesting fit, a weird fit, but trust me when I tell you, I could kind of see this happening, as weird as that may sound. Well, if you thought the last one was weird, this one gets even stranger. The Las Vegas Raiders. If you ever heard John Gruden comment on Jameis Winston, he seems like a big fan of Jameis. Just everything I know about John Gruden and his comments in the past regarding Jameis Winston, he seems like a huge fan. And we know John Gruden likes having some of his guys on his team. Like, if you look at his draft, that was heavily influenced by John Gruden wanting to get a winning culture in there. I know Jameis doesn't necessarily have the winning culture in the NFL, but he did play in a national championship. Did they? I can't remember if they won or not. I'm not even going to try to remember. But he did play in a national championship. That's something. And I know, like I said, Gruden was a huge fan of Jameis Winston. And that kind of will go under the radar for a lot of fans. It's not something you'll think about per se. But this would just be wild. It would just be chaos if a turnover machine goes to the dysfunctional but yet somehow fun and entertaining Raiders. But I will say this, though. Say what you want. They got a running game with Josh Jacobs. The offensive line is much better than what he had in Tampa Bay. You just go get a receiver at number 12, maybe a CeeDee Lamb. You go get him at number 12. It's not the craziest of fits. It's not crazy to think Jameis would not have success here because, unlike Derek Carr, Jameis will make any throw he wishes. He will push the ball down the field. He will not be afraid to take shots. He will not be ultra conservative, which is a good and a bad thing if you're talking about Jameis because of the 30 for 30 season. But I feel like that is just what John Gruden wants. He wants a guy that is not only going to have his offense down, but is going to be able to push the ball down the field. With Derek Carr, Derek Carr can throw the ball down the field, but his tendencies just don't allow him to. It's almost like he's a little scared to. And Jameis ain't scared to make no damn throw. Like I said, based on all of his turnovers, he ain't scared. But he'd be going to a much better offensive line with a better running game. You'd have to go get better receivers, but we saw when Chris Godwin went down and Mike Evans didn't play, he was making guys like Scotty Miller look relevant. So you laugh now, but this probably would not be a bad idea for a fit. So yeah, this is option 3 for Jameis Winston. Crazy, but this is what we got. And up next, we will be talking about his draft mate, Marcus Mariota. We're going to go ahead and just start off Marcus Mariota's teams with a bang right here. I don't even have him staying with the Tennessee Titans. I don't see a world where Mariota wants to stick around with the Tennessee Titans. So option 1 is going to be the Chicago Bears. To me, he's just better than Mitchell Trubisky. Like, I know in Madden it's not necessarily true, but they both have the same bad tendencies. I think the difference is Mariota's just slightly better, maybe. I mean, I don't even know. Mariota is one of those conservative quarterbacks as well where he's a little scared to push the football down the field, but he has the athleticism and he needs to use it more. And I think this coaching staff would drill that into his head and you would see him actually play well and show some of that potential that he had before he came into the draft, which would also be important. And he won't be like super cheap. Like, you're not going to get him for like $4 million, but you could get him for about 8 to 12 to be either a backup or a bridge quarterback or a competing quarterback. And you could probably get him on a short-term deal as well and just take a flyer on him, take a chance on him, because he's still very young. He still has some potential left in him, and I think with the right coach you could bring it out of him. So this is going to be option 1 for me for Marcus Mariota. Coming to the Chicago Bears, got a good receiving core here. You'd like to get better at the tight end position, but you got some good receivers here. You have a nice backfield filled with some talented running backs, and the offensive line ain't bad either. The Bears' offensive line's actually pretty good compared to most. I would say slightly better than Tennessee's, depending on the game. But losing Kyle Long is tough. I think he did step away from football, but hey, I like the idea of Mariota coming here, so this is going to be option 1. So option 2 right here definitely seems weird. Mariota going to the Chiefs. Why would Marcus Mariota want to go to the Chiefs when you have Patrick Mahomes there and you're going to have to pay him like $200 million on a 5-year deal? Why would you do that? Well, it could be beneficial for both sides. You see, Andy Reid, he already knows Patrick Mahomes is a star. He already knows he's a beast. So you don't really have to monitor Patrick Mahomes. You could spend time trying to develop Mariota on like a little short-term deal. Maybe it's just like a process. He stays there, he sticks around, and by the time the second year of Patrick Mahomes' contract kicks in, you can let him go. And I think for Mariota's case, it would be okay. I get to reset, and I get to go to a situation where I'm not gonna play. Unless God forbid Patrick Mahomes gets injured again, I don't have to play, and I get to learn from one of the best quarterback developers and one of the quarterback teachers in Andy Reid. I get to sit back, I get to learn, and I get to reset my own market by working with Andy Reid. And he's so well respected that other teams will look at the fact that, hey, I signed a little 2 or 3 year deal, I sat behind Andy Reid, and by the time I hit free agency again, I'll be like 27, 28. I'll be even more intriguing then because of my experience under Andy Reid. We all see guys that work for Andy Reid, they all get jobs in this league. You look at Doug Peterson, you look at Matt Nagy, just to name a few. You look at Frank Reich, you look at those guys, they all get jobs. Eric Bieniemy hasn't yet, but his time is coming. You have a feeling that his time is going to come. But with a guy like Mariota, he doesn't have to play. He could just sit and learn. And that'll be so beneficial for a team like Kansas City. I know you don't want to pay for a backup quarterback, but it's just an intriguing option right here. And I think those are the only two options that I'm going to have in mind. I could see a situation where maybe he goes to a different team that wants to develop quarterbacks, but I'm going to leave it at 2 teams for Marcus Mariota. And the next guy we are going to talk about, maybe not a big name, not a big name compared to a lot of these guys, but it's a guy that I'm going to talk about nonetheless, and that's Case Keenum. And here we are with option 1. It's actually kind of funny because Case Keenum did actually play for the Denver Broncos. But the reason I like this more than I did 2 years ago when he was a Denver Bronco was because of Pat Shurmur. Pat Shurmur was Case Keenum's offensive coordinator in Minnesota, where he had the best year of his professional career. And I feel like that marriage, that relationship would work. It's proven to have worked, and I think it would work again as a backup, though, because Drew Lock is clearly, the future guy in this building, and it's Drew Lock's starting job to lose. But I think Case Keenum would offer a lot of mentorship. He would offer the knowledge that he has with Pat Shurmur and the chemistry that those two have created, and it would really help a player like Drew Lock having 2 different mentors in there. The mind and the play calling of Pat Shurmur and the knowledge and the history of Case Keenum, I feel like would really help a guy like Drew Lock. So don't sleep on the potential of Case Keenum returning to Denver. This is honestly the best fit that I have, and this may be the only fit that I have, but I'm going to try to think of at least one more, and I'll make sure it's not too outlandish or crazy. So this is going to be fit number 1. I love this fit the most. It makes the most sense to me. But I'll give you at least one more for Case Keenum. And here we are, ladies and gentlemen, with the final fit, and that is Case Keenum, option 2 right here. This is Case Keenum on the Philadelphia Eagles. I just thought of this one. I was actually just searching through different teams thinking, okay, where would Case Keenum possibly go? And this is a team that came in mind. This is a team that in the past has not been afraid to spend a little bit of money on having a backup quarterback. Of course, they had brought Nick Foles back. They won a Super Bowl. They were able to convince Josh McCown to stick around. They, obviously went and got a guy like Nate Sutfield. So this is a team that is not afraid to invest in a backup quarterback. And I hate to say it, but I think Carson Wentz is cursed. It seems like every year he gets hurt, and it's just unfortunate because he is actually a good quarterback. And I wouldn't say he's quite a great quarterback yet, but you could see why so many people like him, like as a potential like stud quarterback in this league. Like he's already a stud, but you know what I'm trying to say. I'm not trying to overhype him. I'm not trying to talk him up to be Patrick Mahomes or nothing, but you get what I'm trying to say. Okay. Carson Wentz is in the very good club. Not great, but very good. And Case Keenum right here would just be a good bridge quarterback. He'd be a good backup if something were to happen to Carson Wentz again, if something were to happen to him, which is not out of the realm of possibility, Case Keenum could step in and run the offense. And I don't think it would be a bad idea. I don't really think a whole lot of teams will be after Case Keenum, which is a good thing. So the only 2 fits that I have right here are the Denver Broncos and the Philadelphia Eagles. I like both of those fits, and that is what we're going to stick with for now. And the next quarterback that I'm going to talk about, and this is an interesting one, is Nick Mullins. So right here, ladies and gentlemen, is option 1 for Nick Mullins. And the reason I say he's an interesting one is because when Jimmy Garoppolo went down and CJ Beathard wasn't available to play, this is the guy who stepped in and actually had some good performances, including his debut game against the Oakland Raiders, where he had over 300 yards and maybe 3 or 4 touchdowns. He had an insane game on a Thursday night as well. And listen, Nick Mullins, I know it's been a while since he's played, but the last we've seen of him, he did not look bad. He looked like a capable backup quarterback, and he is a restricted free agent, which is something you have to keep in mind. So the most likely option would be him sticking around in San Francisco. But I do have at least one more fit if Nick Mullins weren't to be the guy that sticks around as a backup here. I do have one more fit, and we are going to talk about that right after this. And here is my second fit right here. Nick Mullins to the LA Rams. Blake Bortles is also a free agent, and if this team wanted to take a shot at just a backup quarterback, just a developmental guy, a guy that's shown flashes before, this wouldn't be a bad idea. We saw the Rams pay a little bit of money to bring in Blake Bortles. This would not be the worst idea in the world to go after a Nick Mullins, just as a backup quarterback. I know the Rams should probably prioritize on everything else except a backup quarterback, but again, this is a guy who's been in the room with Kyle Shanahan, and then you put him in the room with Sean McVay. Maybe the next time he hits the free agent market, similar to what we talked about with Marcus Mariota, he could be a guy who teams, a few teams out there just have interest in. Okay, he's worked with Shanahan, he's worked with McVay. I mean, maybe the kid can play and maybe another team takes a shot on him, but I think this would be super intriguing to me, him going to the Rams as just a backup quarterback, because Blake Bortles is set to hit the open market. Blake Bortles, I don't really know where he could go. I don't see the Rams bringing him back, so I could see a team like the Rams taking a shot in the dark on Nick Mullins. And the next quarterback we are going to talk about is going to be Dak Prescott. We're going to have to get some of these bigger quarterbacks out of the way, so we're going to talk about Dak Prescott next. So, in my personal opinion, there's only one real option when it comes to Dak Prescott, and that is him remaining as a Dallas Cowboy. It'll probably be on the franchise tag. They might Kirk Cousins him. It's interesting because, of course, we heard all the funny comments about Prescott, wanting to be a $40 million quarterback. I don't know if he was serious. I don't know if it's a joke. I'll just say it's somewhere in the middle. Maybe he was kind of dead serious, and maybe he was kind of lightheartedly joking. But Prescott, he's one of those guys where I'm not really too sure about. I've seen good things out of Dak Prescott. I've seen really bad things out of Dak Prescott. And this past season, yeah, he was productive. Yeah, he had the stats. He had the glamorous numbers, but they weren't really that good of a red zone team, and they were 8-8. You got to convert in the red zone to put points on the board to win games, and they just really didn't do that at a high level. But Prescott, in between the 20s, just got you all over the field. But this team went 8-8, very talented team. But like I said, this is really the only option I can see for Dak Prescott, and that's really it, to be honest. It's Dallas. That's it. But the next quarterback, we only have a few more quarterbacks we got to talk about, so I'll go ahead and name them off to you. The next quarterbacks that we're going to talk about, let's see, where's he at? Taysom Hill. Taysom Hill's going to be the next guy that we touch on. Okay, where's he at? This is a long list, but I only want to talk about a few guys. So the next guy we're going to talk about is Taysom Hill. And then we're going to talk about Teddy Bridgewater, then Ryan Tannehill, and then Tom Brady. And that'll be it for the quarterback list. So let's go ahead. Let's touch on Taysom Hill right now. So, ladies and gentlemen, here's option number 1. That's going to be the New Orleans Saints. I could definitely see this team bringing back Taysom Hill. He's a restricted free agent. It'll be pretty easy for this team to bring him back. This is easily option number one, but I do have three options for Taysom Hill because of his unique skill set. Of course, he does a lot for the Saints. He can throw the ball a little bit. He can run the ball. He can block. He can catch, play special teams, return kicks. He is the Swiss Army knife. He does it all. And losing a guy like that would be pretty valuable, actually. Would really kind of hurt this team, because then you have to find that next guy that can kind of offer a similar skill set. And it would just be very interesting to see what would happen there, because in my mock draft, which is on the channel, by the way, definitely recommend checking that out, I have the New Orleans Saints going with Justin Jefferson, who's like a big slot receiver who, this team, like I said, they need pass catchers. And, Taysom Hill's kind of been one of those receivers as well, who, of course, does everything. So, I don't know. I feel like this would be easily the number one option, but I have two more in mind. And here's option one right here, Taysom Hill to the San Francisco 49ers. I think Kyle Shanahan could get really creative with him. You could see maybe this team run a little wildcat with Deebo Samuel and Taysom Hill in the backfield. I just think Taysom Hill with Kyle Shanahan would just be unfair, because you already see how they utilize Kyle Juszczyk, their fullback. You see how they've been using Deebo Samuel in the second half of the year. Imagine adding another playmaker. He's a restricted free agent. You could probably afford to overpay him a little bit, just to have another mismatch on this team like Taysom Hill. You can get really creative with a guy like him, based on his skill set, and he could even be your backup quarterback. I know this team has Nick Mullins, but based on the scenarios that I had given, I could see Nick Mullins probably getting a decent offer out there from a team like the Rams, and this would just free up a spot for a guy like Taysom Hill to come in, be your backup quarterback, be your Swiss Army knife. And I think Kyle Shanahan would really enjoy having a guy like him in the building. He's one of those guys that he had a great offense this year, Kyle Shanahan did, but he's got to stay ahead of the curve. He's got to continue to innovate. And I think stealing a page out of Sean Payton's book by using the skill set of Taysom Hill would just be very intriguing. I would hate it as a Packer fan, because we already can't beat these guys, and then you're going to give them Taysom Hill. Like, come on, man. That's just unfair. But I do have one more fit out there, and we'll talk about that here in a second. And then right here, here's the final fit. Taysom Hill on the Kansas City Chiefs. I think Andy Reid would be very intrigued. Like I said, you put him in the hands of an offensive genius. We saw what he did with Sean Payton. We already talked about the possibility with Kyle Shanahan. Taysom Hill could come in and do a lot of different things for Andy Reid as well. It will allow him to be even more clever, to experiment a little bit more. And like I said, he could actually mentor Taysom Hill to be a quarterback, like an actual full-time quarterback. Of course, you could utilize his gifts as an athlete or whatever. That's all cool, but you could actually develop him to be an actual quarterback as well in the process. So I think it's a win-win for Taysom Hill, and I think Andy Reid would have a little bit more life in him, even though he already does as a Super Bowl winning head coach now. But this fit to me would just be very interesting. And the next guy we're going to talk about is his teammate, Teddy Bridgewater. So we'll see you there. So right here with Teddy Bridgewater, this obviously would be option one. I know there are reports out there that this team wants to, they think Taysom Hill could be their future quarterback. To me, that's partially smoke and mirrors. I do think Teddy Bridgewater could be the guy here. He went 5-0 as a starter last year. I think 6-0 overall as a starter, for the Saints. But this is a guy who has done some good things under Sean Payton. He has grown as a quarterback. He has gotten better. He's, even more efficient than he was in college. And in college, he was pretty efficient. I just think he should just stay here. Just stay here, make a living, be the quarterback for this team. But yeah, this is option number one. And for a guy like Teddy Bridgewater, he is going to have a lot of options out there. But to me, this is option number one. Let's go ahead and get to option number two. So right here, the next fit that I have for Teddy Bridgewater, option number two, is the Carolina Panthers. And I know what you're thinking. The Saints aren't going to let this guy go to Carolina. You're right. They're going to let him go to free agency, and Carolina's going to bring him in. Because you don't just allow somebody to actually go to a division rival, silly. But seriously, let's think about this for a second. When Teddy Bridgewater first got to New Orleans, Joe Brady was the offensive coordinator. Joe Brady went to LSU for the year that Teddy Bridgewater went 5-0. Joe Brady is now back in Carolina after his one season with LSU, and he's back in the NFL, I should say, but he's here with Carolina as the offensive coordinator. There's a little history there with him and Bridgewater, and I feel like he could come in and be a bridge gap quarterback. Hence Bridgewater, get it, the last name. But seriously, Teddy Bridgewater could come in here for a couple of years and just ball out, continue to play well, and you could allow a guy, potentially in the draft either this year or next year to come in, provide some competition, but let Teddy Bridgewater be the guy for about 3 or 4 years and allow, a quarterback to develop. Maybe this team is in the running for Trevor Lawrence next year. Who knows? But I think Teddy Bridgewater with Carolina would be pretty intriguing to see, because of course there will be added motivation to play the Saints, because the Saints just let him hit free agency. So it would just be very interesting. Good storyline, of course. The NFL loves a good story. Stories equal ratings. This would be a pretty fun one. And then right here for the third and final trade, or not trade, I'm sorry, right here for the third and final option number 3, we have Teddy Bridgewater going to Miami. I mean, just look at the screen. Hometown state, Miami, Florida. Where did Teddy Bridgewater try to sign last year? Miami, Florida. I don't care that they want Tua Tagovailoa. I don't care. This is me trying to predict stuff to happen. Teddy Bridgewater would not be a bad idea in Miami. I mean, he just wouldn't. And maybe that would sway the Chargers to draft Tua instead of Justin Herbert, who I like Tua more than Justin Herbert. But again, I hope my mind has changed about Justin Herbert. Anyway, we're getting too muddy with the draft waters. This would be good for Teddy Bridgewater. He gets to play for his hometown. Just added motivation to kind of be a hero for them. And he's got experience with Sean Payton. He played early in his career with Minnesota. He's just had a very interesting career. And I think coming back to his hometown to be the guy, it would just add extra motivation, like I said, for Teddy Bridgewater. And it would just be so interesting to see this happen, because we know that Brian Flores and the Miami Dolphins have a ton of draft picks. And maybe you don't have to draft a quarterback. Remember, Josh Rosen is still on the roster. I know Josh Rosen hasn't quite shown that he can be a good quarterback, but he's still very young, and you don't really exactly know what you have in him. He's been on 2 terrible teams, and you never know. Maybe he's the guy moving forward. You never know. You can't just give up on a player so easily. It's way too easy to do in this league as well. Everyone's guilty of it. And then you see guys like Ryan Tannehill win comeback player of the year and play in the AFC Championship. So I'm just saying, don't give up on a player too easily. We do it all the time. We're all guilty of it, including me. But Teddy Bridgewater could come in here, be the starting quarterback, and with those three draft picks, instead of using one on a quarterback, maybe you go and draft, I don't know, the best defensive player available. Or maybe you double down on offensive line and then go get, I don't know, DeAndre Swift at pick 26. There's so many things you could do now by getting a quarterback in free agency. I mean, who else are you going to spend all that cap money on? Seriously. You have almost $100 million in cap space projected for you. You might as well break some of that bread to bring in Teddy Bridgewater. Who else are you going to spend it on? I mean, you have all those draft picks. Nobody has more flexibility to move around in the draft than Miami. I mean, seriously, they could do some damage. Just imagine, as an NFL fan, you bring in Teddy Bridgewater. Miami has 3 first-round picks, 2 second-round picks, 2 third-round picks. This draft, you could potentially draft at least 4 to 5 starters, maybe 7 if you're that fortunate on your team. That is insane if you are the Miami Dolphins. So if I'm Miami, this would not be a bad idea. This would actually be pretty interesting. I'm all for it. But let's go ahead and talk about Ryan Tannehill and then, of course, Tom Brady. All right, ladies and gentlemen, when it comes to Ryan Tannehill, I only have one option: to be a Tennessee Titan. I think he's going to get franchise tagged, or they'll work out a short-term deal. But I do think Ryan Tannehill is going to be the quarterback for Tennessee next year. It could be Phillip Rivers, like I entertained earlier in the video, but I honestly do think it's going to be Ryan Tannehill. Just what he was able to do this year, to me, it just seems like he's going to stay here. I could offer like one more extra fit or an extra option per se, but to me, this just feels like the only option. And with that, we will talk about Tom Brady, and then we will, kind of discuss briefly a couple of quarterbacks that could get traded in the offseason. I wanted to focus mainly on the free agent guys, which is why you haven't seen Cam Newton or Andy Dalton, but we'll talk about them a little bit later at the end of the video just to kind of wrap things up. But let's talk about Tom Brady and where TB12 could be providing his services. So without a doubt right here, this is option number one by far, him remaining a Patriot. If you watch my mock draft video, I did get them a quarterback, but I did say before I made the pick, Tom Brady, I do think he's going to stay here. Now, this is option one. I do have two more, but to me, this is the best one. Just stay with the New England Patriots. Take Joe Montana's advice. Take everyone else's advice that is telling you to stay, because honestly, it's the best thing that you could do. No need to really, move at this stage of your career. I mean, yeah, we've seen athletes do it all the time, but for me, if I'm Tom Brady, I would stay in New England. That's option one. We got two more, and then that's it. Here is my option number two. The more that I think about it, the more that I kind of like it. I think Tom Brady and Frank Reich would click. I feel like they would click. They'd get along. They'd be able to, move forward with this offense. And plus, you have a great offensive line here in Indianapolis. You got running backs that can play, like Marlon Mack, who they're trying to get an extension for, Nyheim Hines, Jordan Wilkins. I mean, you got running backs that could play. You would like this team to add another receiver. I think they would with Tom Brady here. They would do everything in their power to make this team a contender overnight. Just having Tom Brady in the building would motivate them to do that. This team does have, of course, their first round pick at 13. You could still go after a quarterback. It's not out of the realm of possibility. Maybe Jacoby Brissett as a trade piece moving forward. You have a second round pick from the Redskins at like 34 overall from the trade last year, which allowed the Redskins to move up and get Montez Sweat. So this team would just be in a better situation. They'd be win now and looking towards the future, because at 13 you could still draft Jordan Love at quarterback and have your guy for the future sit under Tom Brady for a year. I mean, how crazy would that be? Tom Brady spreading his wisdom, Frank Reich teaching this guy the offense while they try to go out and win a Super Bowl. That would just be crazy. And I don't know how Colts fans would react to Tom Brady coming to their team after he's been beating Peyton Manning his whole career for most of the time, but I think they'd be embracive, I think they would. But I don't want to speak on behalf of Colts fans, but I got one more option, and this one's crazy, and it's based on rumors. That's it. All right, ladies and gentlemen, the third and final fit, and this is mainly based on rumors. The Las Vegas Raiders. I did think about it. This team could get more explosive playmakers. They'll have money. They'll have the 12th overall pick, and I have them getting CeeDee Lamb at number 12 for TB12. What does this mean for Derek Carr's future? I don't know, but if Brady were to come here, it would just be totally interesting. John Gruden likes working with older quarterbacks as well, despite what I said about Jameis Winston. In the heart of hearts of John Gruden, he likes working with veteran quarterbacks, guys that know the game, doesn't have to teach shit too. Because you got to be a wizard to do the John Gruden offense. And Brady, even though his arm ain't the strongest anymore, he'll still push the ball down the field. Like he'll still be able to do that. And then he'll be the guy that opens up that beautiful stadium in Las Vegas. That's star power as well. Economically, I mean, this is just a great move for the Raiders to do. I know it's not the smartest move, but it's a great move for this team. And the Raiders have a great offensive line. The run game is there. You could add more weapons. The defense, yeah, I'm worried about the defense 100%, but the spectacle of having Tom Brady in Vegas playing in a division only for 1 year with like Mahomes and the improving Broncos, the Chargers, who are going to find their way eventually. It feels like this would just be totally interesting right here. So Brady with the Raiders, more of a rumor, but something I definitely wanted to entertain. So I guess what we can do now is basically just talk about, you know, a couple of quarterbacks that could be traded. So what we're going to do is just update the roster real quick. That's how I had been doing it the whole time off camera. But basically what we're going to do is talk about a couple of guys that could be traded. And one of them obviously is Cam Newton. He's on IR in this game, so we can't really show graphics of where he could go. But I do like the potential of him possibly going to the Bears. But I don't know if the Bears are going to pull the trigger on that because of how they feel about Mitch Trubisky. I don't know. That could be smoke and mirrors, though, but I do like the potential of Cam Newton going there. I also like the potential of Cam Newton going to the Miami Dolphins. It's one that hasn't been talked about or rumored. I haven't heard anything about it, but with him being on a 1-year deal, it depends on how you feel about Ryan Fitzpatrick. Do you want to move off of Ryan Fitzpatrick? You know, do you want to trade him elsewhere for him to be a part of a different situation? You could. I mean, Cam Newton's an upgrade over Fitzpatrick. You could still allow yourself to draft Tua, but just having Cam Newton as a bridge guy for a year, maybe you just use him to improve his own trade stock so you can move him at the deadline. I don't know. It would just be pretty interesting. Those are the only two teams I have in mind. The Dolphins make the least amount of sense. The Bears make the most amount of sense. I don't know. That's just what I would go with. And then finally, the other guy that we talked about that could be getting traded is Andy Dalton. We know this team is going to take Joe Burrow at number 1 overall, the quarterback from LSU. Andy Dalton, you know, at TCU is a beast. In the NFL, he's kind of been the same player, if we're going to be real. But this is a guy who, you know, he could still offer his services to a good football team out there. And one obviously is the Chicago Bears. Again, they're a quarterback away from being even more competitive than they already are. I think Andy Dalton's an upgrade over Mitch Trubisky right now. And that's something they could desperately use. Another team that I could see, I'm going to steal this from Daniel Jeremiah, excuse me. I'm going to steal this from Daniel Jeremiah. It's the Philadelphia Eagles. Again, similar to what we talked about with, I can't remember which quarter. I think it was Case Keenum. Similar to what we talked about with Case Keenum, just having that insurance policy at the backup quarterback spot would not be a bad idea. The problem is the cap hit. I don't know if that would work for the Philadelphia Eagles because do you really want to invest like $19 million into a backup quarterback when you're already paying Carson Wentz? That's $50 million combined tied up to the quarterback position. I don't know if that's the smartest thing to do in a cap salary league. So that's just one that I kind of like, but I kind of don't see it happening. Daniel Jeremiah, sorry, but the Bears feel like the only realistic fit. Maybe the Vikings, but the Vikings are kind of in cap space hell, and I think they're doing just fine with Kirk Cousins, you know. But if you wanted to get Andy Dalton in there, restructure his contract, try to extend him, you could, but I think I'd much rather have Kirk Cousins. But the Vikings, it's just an interesting one because I've been seeing people mock them a quarterback in the draft, and I don't necessarily agree. So I just figured I'd throw the Vikings out there to entertain the idea of that. But that's really all I have for you, to be real with you. So hopefully you guys enjoyed this video, and let me know what you think about all of these quarterbacks. Where could you see them going? Do you agree with some of my fits? Is there some that I'm missing out on that I didn't quite hit on that I probably should have? Let me know down in the comment section below, and peace out.